In the previous tutorial, we set it up so we not only have randomly generated obstacles, but we've split that up so we can also randomly generate power boosts and something to increase our hit points if we hit obstacles. But right now, nothing is happening. We haven't done the programming to actually make those things have an impact. Now, in the previous tutorial, I unintentionally recorded these out of order. I thought I had already recorded a tutorial that showed how to add those changes, but I hadn't. And so I'm going to go ahead and we'll go through that now. And then we will, and then we'll keep going. Okay, so first, I can't remember what I had told you previously, but you should have your flow graph set up like this for your road tiles, right? And the variable it should be getting is an object variable called tile speed, right? And it's this tile speed variable, which should have been set up previously. Just make sure that that's correct, because right now the road, if that's set up, then the road should not be reacting to any changes that I've made, and I've tried to shut everything else off. So we'll see if we get any reactions to speed here at all. Right, okay, so so now, right, the road is staying the same speed. The objects are speeding up or slowing down based on whether or not I hit them. And that is part of our goal with this tutorial. And then when we do that, we're actually going to make a couple changes that will break the road and then lead into the next tutorial. Okay, so here we go. So let's look at how we can make make those things have a benefit or detriment to us. So what we need to do is initially, and you can see that this is a nightmare, right? I started working on this on the player, right? So the player I had checking the collider, and everything gets nightmarish over here because we're trying to do several different things for each unit. And so what I'm going to do is eventually delete all of this, right? This was just a test. This was something where I was prototyping and trying to figure out what was going to work to get these things to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to have each one of these units have its own flow graph that will be dealing with collisions, right? Because we want all the motion to be the same, right? So we're using the obs motion macro in order to control to get all the different objects to move. However, when we have collisions, what happens in those collisions is is going to be different for each type of unit, and it's going to be a lot easier if we have those things included in on the individual units rather than trying to pile them all onto the player. So first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we know what object is the player so we can check those collisions. So Bob is my player. You could have named yours something different, but what we need to do is right now Bob's untagged. So I want to go down and I want to make sure I tag Bob as a player, and then we can get started. So the other thing is, right, I need to make sure I've got my player movement set, but I've got all of these other scripts over here that I really don't need or want to have active. And so the quickest way for if you've got something you've been working on and you're and then you need to disable it, the easiest way is just to right click right where the event goes into the thing and then that way you can keep the scripts. Like if you're like, oh, I did all this work, I'd like to keep this because I need to reference it, I don't want to delete it, but I also don't want it to work, then you can go ahead and continue doing this, but you just disable all of those sections that you don't need. And so I've gone ahead and disabled those. So now in my case, right, nothing that, now there should be no impact whatsoever. So let's go ahead and see if that's true. And this is what your scene should already look like. You should just be able to sort of fly through all of these objects with nothing happening, right? So no change occurs whatsoever. This is what should occur, right? If your player is bouncing off any of your obstacles, that means that whatever obstacle you're bouncing off of, whether it's an obstacle or a power-up or whatever, you have the is trigger on the collider unchecked on that. So you need to check mark that. Okay, so let's go ahead and select our different objects. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my project, and I'm going to be selecting my project pane here, and I'm going to be selecting the prefab that I want to start with. So let's go ahead and start with the base obstacle that we've begun with. I'm going to select this. I'm going to open the prefab. And now you can see I actually have multiple prefabs on, multiple flow machines on here. And so, right, there's no reason why you would just have one flow machine. So what we want to do is we want to create this second flow machine. So you're going to go to Add Component, type in Flow, add a flow machine, and then create a new macro. I called this OBS trigger, right? Obstacle trigger. And then I'm going to go ahead and click Edit Graph. Now, when you do that, you should have nothing here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these real quick. Or actually, you can just, you know how to do this now. Why don't you just pause the video, create these three options, make sure the tag says player, and we have this branching behavior. Okay, I'm assuming you probably paused the video, created those things, and we're ready to go on. So I've got these three tags, right? This is something that we do all the time, right? We find a trigger, compare the tag, and then we have to do some sort of logic, some sort of branching based on the outcome. So if it's a player, right, it's true. Oh, that's nice. Thanks, Java. Right, so we're only going to be using the true branch on this. And so what do we want to do when that happens? So one of the first things that we want to do is we want to reduce the number of hit points. And so if you don't have this variable in your scene already, go ahead and create a hit points variable and make it an int and set the value to 3, right? That means basically if we get hit by 3 obstacles, we have 0 hit points. For the time being, we are not going to, we're not going to worry about what happens after when you get 0 hit points. But we're going to at least be decrementing hit points. And so what we need to do is we need to right click, and we're going to say, we need to, first, let's go ahead and grab that variable and drag it into our scene, right? We need to get our hit points variable, and we need to right click, and we need to say add unit, and we want to subtract 1 from that. So we're going to use the subtract thing, and the one we want to use is the scalar, right? Because that lets us just throw a value in there, and by default that second value is 1. Right, so we're going to say we want the hit points to be the A value, right, because we want to be subtracting 1 from that total. And then what we want to do is we then want to basically take whatever we get and put it back in the hit points variable. So I'm just going to right click, I'm going to say add unit, I'm going to say set var. And once we do that, I'm going to go set scene variable, and then I'm going to choose hit points. Okay. And so now what I can do is I can run my true over to here, and I can run this value into the green dot there. Okay, so now whenever we get hit, our number of hit points or health points or whatever you want to call them should reduce. So let's go ahead and hop out of this view, and let's go ahead and run this. And then once it starts running, we'll slide this over so we can make sure we can see our hit points, and we should watch them slowly get lower, right? So now I've hit 1, I've got 2, I've got 1, I've got 0, and now I'm going to just float here in the middle, and maybe eventually, oh, there's -1. Okay, right, so -2, -3, and so on. Okay, so, and I want to make sure that, right, when I hit the other obstacle, that nothing bad is happening. Let's see here. It's hard to see because I'm going so fast. Okay, yeah, it's just when the green ones hit me that I am having hit points reduced. Fantastic. Okay, so our hit points are being reduced. So let's go ahead and select our obstacle again and go to open prefab up here and then go to the flow graph. Okay, so now we've oops, that's the wrong flow graph, right? It's always gonna default to choosing the top flow graph. So I'm gonna switch to the trigger. And so now this trigger is working, fantastic. Okay, so we're having hit points reduced. What else do we want to do? The other thing that we want to do is we want to be able to slow all the units down, right? And so initially I was using this obs speed variable that was an object variable. Now the problem with that is if I want the speeds for all of the variables, for all of the objects to slow down at the same time, right? As though, right, because what we're trying to do is simulate that our character is slowing down, right? Which would mean everything would be coming towards us more slowly, and then it can speed up again. But to start with, we just want to be able to set some value. And so we need to create a couple scene variables. And in the obs motion tag, I've already changed this to a scene variable that's named object speed, right? And if we go over to our scene variables, you'll see that we have object speed. Now, the other variable we're going to have in here that you need to create if you haven't created an object speed variable in your scene variables is base speed, right? Object speed we're going to initialize to -20, and the same with base speed, right? I also have this default speed in here. I've been going crazy. You could call it default speed or base speed. Base speed is less characters, so that's the one I'm going to use in this tutorial, right? I could also just delete default speed, but I can't remember if I used it somewhere, so I don't want to break everything. But so we've got this base speed, right? And the base speed is what's going to be like the variable that keeps track of what the speed should be, right? Because we're going to have speed that's going to be changing, right? We're going to hit something, our object speed's going to slow down, and then we're going to basically have a little timer that goes through and slowly ramps our speed back up to the base speed. Okay. So we've got our object speed set here, and that means that all the objects are using the same variable to set their speed. So when this changes for one thing, it changes for everything. And so what we're going to do is we are going to go back to our other graph, to the trigger. And the other thing that we want to do is we want to reduce this to some hit. And so one of the other scene level variables we should create is, and I called it slowdown up here. So go ahead and create a slowdown variable that's a float. Now, I have this slowdown set to 5, right? And so what that does is right, -20 is full speed, so it's going to reduce our speed to -15. But I think we should go ahead and just boost this up to 10 so it's really noticeable. All right, so we're going to slow down. Our slowdown is 10. And so what we want to do is the other thing we need to do is we need to pull this slowdown variable in. Right, and then we're not going to do any subtraction or anything. All we're going to do is we're going to set the value of object speed to our slowdown to start with. So I'm going to say add unit, and I'm just going to, I'm going to say set var, and go to scene variable, and then choose the, why are hit points and not the only ones that I can choose? Maybe I need to drag it in as a get variable first before it lets me do that. So let's go ahead and say, okay, object speed, I'm just going to pull this in here. Come on. I'm not even going to connect it to anything, but as soon as I do that, I feel like now I can use object speed, right? So this is something to note, right? With macros, you have to at least get the scene variable before you can use a scene variable. Right? If it's an embed, you can just use all the scene variables, right? But if it's a macro, which is what we want in this case, I mean, we could technically use an embed, but I don't think it would work well with this being a prefab. So, right, we just need to have this in here somewhere. It doesn't even need to be connected. It just needs to be referenced, and then we can set it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm just going to feed this in here, and I'm going to feed this across here. Now this is going to stick, right? It's going to, everything's going to slow down permanently, but let's go ahead and test it and make sure it works. Okay, so so maybe 10's too much. Everything's going off into the distance. Okay, let's go ahead and stop this. So maybe 5 was the right value. Let's go ahead and go back to our scene variables and change our slowdown to 5. There's a good chance that somewhere... oh, I know why. Because I didn't subtract it, right? So the mistake I made is I got ahead of myself, and what I could have done slow down as -10, and then I would have just set it. But because it's +10, what I actually need to do is do some subtraction. So I apologize, I made a mistake. I do it all the time, right? And this is part of the process. You know, usually tutorials, people go through and they do it, it looks like they do it right the first time, and they, you know, whereas they most likely took some time to build this script up. And so hopefully some of these mistakes help you understand the process of like doing something wrong and then figuring out how to make it work, right? And it's sort of debugging. It's like, why did this happen, right? And so it's a process of questioning what you're doing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click a second time. I'm going to type in add, because really we want to add 10 to the value. So I'm going to go to math scalar, and I've got my slowdown. So now what I can do is I can bring my object speed in here, and I can actually attach it. So right, we're, oops, and I've got these misordered, so let's delete that. I'm going to go ahead and have my object speed be the A value. I tend to use whatever the value is that I'm changing, I keep in the A slot. In some cases it doesn't matter. Right, like in this case it wouldn't matter which order I did this in, but it just is like, it's something that I do to keep track, so I always know A is the one I'm changing, B is whatever is modifying that value. And so I'm going to go ahead and drop this in now. Let's see if this works a little bit better. Okay, so right, it slowed down and then it completely stopped because I hit a second one. Right, and so now this is problematic, and you can see the road is continuing to go, and that's because the road is not being controlled by the object speed variable, right? It's got its own tile speed, it is doing its own thing. Now I've hit a third one, and now it's going backwards, right? So let's go ahead and stop that, because that's not fully the behavior we want, but it's working thus far. So what we would like is for this slowdown to only affect you for a short amount of time, right? So it's sort of like hitting a speed bump, or, I don't know, going from like, walking on pavement to walking in deep snow for a little bit, right? It slows you down for a bit, but then you can keep going. So I'm going to scoot everything over just a little bit, just to clean it up, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom. I'm going to use my Option key to pull this over. So now we need to do a couple things to make this slowdown work, and to be able to bring it back up to our base speed. And that's going to require some math and some timing. Okay, so the unit we're going to need to create to make this happen, right? Previously we've used timers and things like that for other things, but there's a unit that's really useful that's called cooldown. And so if I right click and just type in cool down, that's one of the options that's available in time, right? And so what cooldown does is, right, the flow comes in, you set your duration just like you would with the normal timer, and then it basically sends a trigger out when it's ready. It also sends out ticks or things to do while it's completing. And one of the other things that it does here is it has this, the remaining amount of time that's just like a hard number. and then the percent remaining, right? And so what we can do is we can use this percent remaining, right? Because each time this thing has a tick, right? Each frame, the percent remaining is going to be reduced. And so as that percent remaining gets reduced, then what we can do is we can use that to increase the speed back from the from whatever it's currently at up to the full speed that we're interested in. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and connect my flow to start with. Now the duration, let's just go ahead and set that to 3 seconds. And one of the other things we're going to need to do, and I don't know if it tells you here, but we're definitely going to want to take our event right now before we forget and make this, select it and check mark that coroutine box, right? Anytime that we're dealing with a time-based thing where we're doing something that's going to be essentially stopping everything else from happening, we want to make sure it's a coroutine so that it can go do its thing, and if we have other flow happening or other events that need to happen, they can continue happening, right? So it doesn't just stop everything. Okay, so I've got that set. So now what we need is, we're not even really worried about the ready necessarily. What we're worried about is the tick and the remaining percent. So how do we use the remaining percent? So the remaining percent is a number between 0 and 100, and we can use that. So what, in the end goal, what we want is every tick we want to update the object speed variable. So I'm going to go ahead and select this unit. I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste. I'm going to drag it over here, and this is just going to connect straight over here. Now, in order to update this value, we need to do some math. Okay, so this percent remaining is a decimal value, and so we need to multiply it by 10 in order to get it up to the percentage that we want. Or maybe what we should do is multiply it by the percentage, by the speed that we want this to, the maximum speed we want this to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to click here, we're going to click down here, we're going to type in mult, and we could either use the generic or the scalar, it doesn't really matter. And then we are going to go ahead and find our base speed variable over here in the scene variables, right? So I'm going to go down to base speed, I'm going to pull this, I'm going to click on it a couple times, pull this in here, and then I'm going to connect my base speed here, right? So my base speed is -20. And what I'm doing is I'm multiplying this percentage by -20, right? So when this starts, the percent remaining is 100%. So this is going to start out at -20, and then it's going to drop down to 0% eventually. And so that would be the wrong thing, right? Because this would do the opposite, right? It would keep us at 20%, and then it would slow us down until we stopped, right? Which isn't what we want. We want to stop and then speed back up again. And so we need to invert this value, right? We need to say, oh, well, instead of this going from -20 to 0, I want it to go from 0 to -20. So how do I do that? The simplest way to do that is to use the same variable to say, well, actually what I want is the result of this needs to be subtracted from, or in this case, potentially added to the result to this value. And what we need to do is we need to invert this value. We need to say, okay, well, I don't want to go from -20 to 0. I want to be going from 0 speed to -20. And to do that, we need to either add or subtract these things together. Now, because this is a negative value, right, because it's going to be -20 times whatever this is, it's going to be a negative value. And then the speed is also negative. Do we add or do we subtract to get this to work? And if we don't know, the best way to do it is just to test out a couple of different options because there's only two things that we can try. So I'm going to click on add unit, and I'm going to type in ADD, so add, and I'm going to say math scalar. I'm going to say, okay, so this is, I know this is what I want to remove from the total amount, right? I want to be, pulling away less and less, right? So I want to start out by completely zeroing out whatever this base speed is, and then with each frame I want that to increase, or the amount that's being subtracted or removed from base speed to increase. So I'm starting with add because I'm using negative numbers, and I'm just going to see what happens. So I know this needs to be the B value, and this one needs to be the A value. And then I'm going to go ahead and connect this, and so let's just test this and see what happens. Worst case is we're wrong, and then we just use the subtract object instead. So let's see what happens. So here it comes. And you can see it sped up instead of slowing down, right? And so that means that something is not working the way it should be. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that. So let's go ahead and change this to a subtract. So to do that, I'm just going to right click. I'm going to click replace. And I'm just going to type in sub. And I'll do the scalar. And it's actually giving me some errors. So let's go ahead and say, what the heck? And what it's saying is basically, well, these two units don't match. So you need to disconnect everything. So that's what I'm going to do. And then we just need to reconnect it. And I don't know why it decided to say that A and B, even though the inputs and outputs are identical, it doesn't like that. So let's try subtract. Now what this should be doing is saying, okay, negative 20 minus negative 20, right? You can think about that as negative, right? When you subtract a negative, that's like adding. So this should be 0 speed, and then it should increase to 20. So let's go ahead and see what happens. But this is how you work, right? You're like, oh, maybe it's add. Nope. Because if you don't do math a lot and when you're dealing with like things like this, okay, it slows down and then it slowly increases its speed again until we're at full speed. Okay, so that works. Great. So now let's go ahead and stop this. And so, right, so we're hitting obstacles, we're getting our hit points reduced, and we are doing this cooldown. Now, all of this code we're going to reuse, but we need to make some changes to it in order to do our speed ups, right? And for our health as well. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to select all of this because I don't want to reuse this script. I'm going to go ahead and hit copy. But I just selected all of those. I don't want to reuse the script. I want to create a new one for my boost. But then I just want to change a few things in this. So I'm going to go ahead and select capsule boost over here, which is going to give me right this. But if I was to go and add a component here, it's only going to be on this instance, right? It won't be on any that get generated. So I need to make sure I don't make that mistake. And I go to my project pane. I go to my capsule boost object. I click on open prefab. Then I add another graph, and I'm going to say flow machine, and I'm going to call this macro. I'm going to click on new. I'm going to call this one, we'll call it boost trigger. I'm going to hit save. And then I'm going to click on edit graph. I'm going to select these two options. I'm going to right click and delete them. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit Command or Control V to paste everything from the previous thing. Now, at this point, right, what's nice is all of this is already done. However, there's a couple things that need to change. One, right, I don't actually need to deal with my hit points for boost, right? All it's doing is speeding me up. So I'm going to go ahead and select these 3 units. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go ahead and delete those. And I'm just going to reconnect true over here to this, to the set the object speed. Now the other thing is, right now I have this get variable of slowdown, right, that's being added to the speed. But what I want to do is I want to speed this up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my scene variables, And I've created a speed up variable. If you don't have a speed up variable, just go ahead and create one. It should be a float, and -20 should be the value. And I'm just going to go ahead and click on this and drag it down in here. And then I'm going to go ahead and select this, this get variable here. I'm going to right click, I'm going to delete that because we don't need the slowdown, we need the speed up. I'm going to go ahead and connect that here, and this should work, right? So if we go through this, this is -20 plus -20. So what it should do is it should speed me up to my object speed should become 40, right? And -40. And then we're going to go into this cooldown function. And so let's go ahead and look at this cooldown function. So again, we've got our base speed. However, we might need to make a change here, right? Because we're taking our base speed, so this is, you know, times whatever percentage, so, you know, base speed, so it would be -20. And we're trying to subtract this from whatever the current speed is, right? Whatever our initial object speed was. But this is a little bit problematic, right? Because we don't really want our base speed here, right? Because we are, instead of slowing down, we're actually speeding up. So right now our object speed is at 40. And so we have our base speed. Okay, so let's go over to this section of the thing. So our object speed is -40. And we want to cool down. We want to slow down from -40 to -20. So -20 is the value of our base speed, right? And that's what we want to arrive at. And so what we need to do is we need to slowly increase the amount that we are removing from this -20. Now, if you remember correctly, this -40. If you remember correctly, we used we had the add in here and we switched it to the subtract because it was doing the opposite of what we wanted. This time we're going to want the add in here. So I'm just going to right click, I'm going to click add unit, type in add. Again, I can use scalar or generic, it doesn't really matter at this point. And then all I want to do is I want to grab B and I want to put this into the A value. And then I want to run this up into object speed. Right, so this should remove, and then I'm going to just go ahead and delete that. Okay, so now what's happening is it should be saying, okay, A, which is -20, plus B, which is, well, let's just see what happens. We may be wrong because this may need to actually be object speed to start with. We'll see. So let's see what happens when we hit this. Okay, it speeds up and it slows back down. Speeds up and it slows back down to 20. All right, so we've done this correctly. And then if I hit a green thing, it slows down. And then it speeds up and then it slows down. All right, so you can kind of see how this is working. We now have impacts based on when we hit these triggers. So now what we need to do is we need to do the health. So let's go ahead and stop this. And now because we actually eliminated the one section from this graph that we wanted for the health boost part, we're going to go ahead and go back to our project tab. We're going to select our obstacle. We're going to go down to our trigger graph. And I think if I just hit Command or Control A, no, that does not work. I have to manually select all, so I'm just going to zoom out. And really, I'm just going to select this much because I know I don't need the cooldown section right now. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Command C to copy, or Control C if you're in Windows. And then I am going to go back to my project pane. I'm going to grab my health pickup. You'll note I made a heart as well, which was just two capsules that I rotated slightly and made children of an empty object, and then named that object health. So you could do that too if you want something a little bit fancier. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to select this. I'm going to go up to Open Prefab. So I know I'm changing the prefab. I'm going to add this component, click on Flow Machine, and create a new thing, and I'm going to call this, right, surprisingly enough, health trigger. I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to go to my flow graph. I'm going to click Edit Graph, make sure I'm in the right place, select these, right click, delete selection, and then Command or Control V to paste. All right, and so all I need right now is to set this up. So what I need to do is change this subtract to an add. So I'm going to go add unit and type in add. And I want the scalar because I want to be able to just have that 1 in there, right? Now, there might be a point where maybe there's special super health units where you put a 2 in there, right? Or 3 or something like that. Or maybe there's one that gives you full health, or, you know, who knows. But right now, we're just going to do a basic one. So I'm going to hit delete. I'm going to move this up. And I'm going to go ahead and put this into the A section so that 1 stays there. And then A plus B is going to go into hit points. Now, as it stands, we're going to, you know, one of the questions you would have to say is do you have a maximum number of hit points, or can you just keep accumulating hit points as you collect these things? Right now you would just continuously be collecting them, but we could put a max on it. And so what we could do is let's go ahead and create a variable, and it doesn't need to be, we might as well make it a scene variable, because then we can use it for our, if we need it somewhere else. But let's go ahead and we're going to call it max HP for hit points or health points. And then we're going to make that a float. Although, actually, I can't remember if this was an int or not. Let's look at those hit points. I think it's an int, right? Yes, I used an int. So let's make sure we do the same type, right? Because an integer, right, it's a whole number. I'm going to set my max hit points to, let's just say 3, because that's what I've been using so far, right? So our max hit points is going to be 3. And what we're going to need to do is we want to be able to compare what this outcome is to our max hit points. We need some logic in here. And so we could either use a greater than equal to or a less than equal to. And what we should do is we probably should say if it's less than or equal to the max hit points, then we want this value to come up and be set as our hit points. If it's equal to 3 hit points or greater, then we just want it to be 3 hit points, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to right click, we're going to say add unit, and we are going to go to logic, and let's say less than or equal. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring this down here, and we're going to say, okay, so A is less than or equal to B. And so for B, rather than hard code it here, we're going to grab our max HP that we just created. And it looks like it takes 2 clicks. And I'm going to feed this in here. Right, so we've got our maximum HP that it's being compared to. And then now I'm going to need a little bit more space. So I'm going to select these, and I'm just going to snug them over here. And because we're going to need a branch, right? So we're going to just say add unit and control, and I think branch will work. Okay, and so if this is true, right now we have this branch here, so let's go ahead and feed this in here. We know that this is the next sentence. We're basically saying if this is true, and then if this is also true, then what we need to do is, if that's true, we're going to go right back in here and just and send this value in there. Right? If this is false, what we're going to do is I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to click on this set variable. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it. And you know, these we don't actually need any of this slowdown stuff, so I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm going to delete that selection, and I'm also going to delete this because we don't need to do anything to our object speed either, right? So let's get rid of all of that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this up a little bit so this makes more sense visually. All right, okay, so we've got this, and if right on one branch we're going to go this way, The other branch, we're going to come down here, and what we're going to do is we're just going to say, pull this max HP over, right? Because that's 3. So if we collect more than 3 of these, then we should it'll just stay 3. And if we have less hit, if we've hit an obstacle, then it should go back up. Okay. Oops. Sorry, I double clicked and made that full screen. All right, so let's go ahead and test this. And it might actually be kind of hard as it stands. So what I'm going to do is I want to make it so that more health pickups show up, right? Because we have these randomly generating, and that means I might, fail pretty hard at this. So let's go ahead and select our obstacle generator, right? And if you remember, we have done this switching. So right now, health pickups only happen every once in a while. So let's go ahead and actually make our obstacles fewer and further between and our health pickups more frequent. So I'm just going to delete these 2 flows and switch them, right? So now obstacles are going to be pretty rare, but more often than not, we're going to have health pickups. And this is going to tell us if our code has worked. And then hopefully we can hit some obstacles and check our hit points going down and see what happens. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we can do. Okay, so I'm going to go to scene variables. Okay, my hit points, I have been colliding with a whole bunch of objects, and my hit points are staying at 3. Now they're down to 2, and let's see if this goes back up to 3. It does, and then let's just make sure it's not overdoing it. Awesome. All right, so now these are not impacting me unless I hit an obstacle and I need to then pick up a hit point. Okay. So, let's, since I switched to these, let's go ahead and switch them back before we forget, because it's so easy to forget. All right, so now our units all work, right? Everything is going great. We've done it. We've made these things make differences in our code, which is totally fantastic, right? Okay. So now the only issue is that, right, the objects speed up and slow down, but the road stays the same speed. And so what we should do is we should probably switch the variable that we're using to control the road. And so you can see, right, this slows down, but the road is still just running past at the same speed no matter what happens here, right? There's no difference in speed whatsoever. And so, and the other thing is we probably need like a game over state if we lose all our hit points, because right now I'm probably at like negative something for my hit points. But right, I'm not too worried about that. There's a health pickup right there and another one. Okay. So I have a feeling that you can probably figure out how to code that. So, and we'll, because we've done everything ahead of time, right? You could, have the game object be destroyed when your hit points equal 0, right? This is something that maybe you can take some time and work on, and then we can look at an example later. But let's go ahead and first, I want to show you what happens when we try and make the road speed change dynamically, right? Right now it's constant. So if we go to any one of the road tiles, right, if we change this graph here, it's going to change it all over the place. Instead of having the tile speed object variable, let's go to our scene variables, and we're going to go to object speed. We're going to use the same variable that we're using to control the speed of the other objects. So right when the other objects slow down, the road's going to slow down too. So let's go ahead and drag this object speed in here, and let's delete that one, and we're going to come over here and let's just go ahead and connect this. Okay. So now the road should speed up and slow down at the same rate, and we're going to see what happens when that occurs, and we're going to talk about why that's happening for a little bit. So if I slow down and then speed up, and just slow down and speed up several times, and you're going to start to notice those white lines start to look a little thicker, those horizontal, the ones that are going across the screen, or maybe they're overlapped some. And so you can see those gaps are getting bigger. Let's go ahead and pause this when there's a good gap, right? So what's happening, and if I zoom out, here you can see this as well. The tiles are starting to get out of sync with one another, right? They're not synced. And the longer I run through this and the more things I hit, the more times I speed up and slow down, the further and further out of sync these tiles are going to get. And so why is that happening?